he's really in trouble. And that's what I call sort of the first impression of the substate. The second impression, you have to recognize the intention to make up that plan cannot happen without the application of the transits to make up the action. In other words, you have a nice academic plan, but you don't implement that immediately. You have to build a plan together. So now I want to direct your attention to this first statement, first goal. First impression, what I call it. And to do that, I want you to read some comments made by Napoleon that have bearing upon those plan and action statements. This is Napoleon speaking. Look what he's saying there. He's saying, hey, this is a tough job. It's hard to keep track. If that's the case, invert the argument. If it's tough for him to keep track, what we're saying, that's a human vulnerability and weakness. So you want to turn that argument and feed that. Make it even more difficult. We're going to get something. So let's turn the whole argument around. When we do that, we come up with an idea we call grand tactics. You're dealing with plans and actions from like grand tactics or operations. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about. You're trying to get inside, you create a tangle, threatening and or non-threatening. The basis for that, you're trying to mesh them in an amorphous, managed, unpredictable way. Certain doubt, or pull an adversary back inside himself. In other words, if a guy can't cope with the world, you tend to pull him back inside himself, which makes him even more disoriented, he can't keep up. Literally pull him back inside himself. And once you do that, thereby you maneuver. You'd be surprised how people like to pull back inside themselves anyway. System. Okay? Let's go to the second impression, where I made a comment about transient speed and the intention. You want to state it this way, transient under the action, speed, and intention. We stated all these before. Probe and test, employ variety, etc. But look at underwrite. Sever his moral ties, disorient, subvert, disorient, disrupt, etc. You're doing all these things. Here's what you're trying to pay off. And the key words, they're either explicit or implicit in these statements. If you tie this together with this, then you look at what I call a generalized strategy. Your strategy. This is what I call your strategy. You see the key idea, you've got to be able to penetrate this system. Bring that out. Go all the way back to Sun Tzu and work forward. How many times? People won't say it. They're all talking about offense. Offense is nothing. The key idea is to penetrate, get inside the system. His mind, his time, his space, or his moral, mental, physical being. So then if you paste it all together, you have your tactics, which feed your grand tactics, which feed your strategy, which feed your strategic aim. And they overlap. It's a penumbra, but it's coherent. They play. We've seen them all before. You see how they all play. Another way of thinking about it, what I call an alternative portrait. Or as they call it, an alternative portrait of ruins. One way to think about it. Showing you other ways you can stay loose. we've shown so far, very destructive in nature. So that in mind, we can think of it in this sense. Your synthesized needs is legal efforts, maneuver, and moral. Here's your idea, and there's your aim. Different ways you can perceive it. Now, you're talking about political campaign. Remember earlier we talked about something in terms of you wanted to isolate your adversary, also maintain your basis of support, your support base, moral, mental, and physical. Isolate his, maintain yours, do not lie and do the same. Go back to Sun Tzu. Remember, talk about get inside the other eyes, know your adversary, know yourself, etc. Look at bowling all the way up. We see some themes that begin to unfold. So let's pull those together. What I call underlying insight. Unless you can penetrate his moral, mental, physical being, sever those bonds that permit him to exist organically, then why should you throw the towel? You won't. Very good. That in turn, when you do that, allows you to isolate him from his allies or any outside support as well, internally, with his buddies. In function. The aim is really penetration isolation. And in direct competitiveness, you're in a lead to a higher level. And if you look at this, and you go all the way back, just reflect upon everything we discussed today, all the way back to Sun Tzu, you just see a theme merge in. Okay? Raising a rather interesting question. Related to something you asked earlier. How do we connect these notions with a national goal? Moving up. One, a grand strategy to support the national goal, and second was predicting for it. Pump up our resolve, drain away adversary resolve, and attract the uncommitted. And in Vietnam, we pumped up theirs, drained away ours, and attract the uncommitted. We lost it. Which suggests you're going to pump up yours, drain away theirs, attract the uncommitted. You've got to know your enemy, know yourself, and the uncommitted. Remember I said Sun Tzu only had 2 of those. You've got to know 3. So, you know, in politics, you understand that implicitly. You've got to know your adversary, yourself, and also the people out there. Which way are they going to go? End conflict on favorable terms. Obviously, there are. Ensure that conflict terms do not provide a base for unfavorable future conflict. Now, these things are easy to say, they're hard to kind of put together. Ideal sense. In any case, if you paste it together, you can kind of lay out a semblance of what I call a one statement, a semblance of a grand strategy. We amplify our spirit of strength. Now, if you're a military sense or a nation state sense, you're talking about political, economic, socially, etc. You're talking about strength. At the same time, the basis for it. Can't be, I'm going to get there. Ideologue or ideologue, whatever you want to call it. Start filtering stuff to this imprint you've got in your brain, probably going to hurt you. Okay? Which then leads, you don't have to read them all, we've all seen it before, the top. So now we're back to the national goal, always been before. Improve our fitness as an organic shape, cope, and never changing environment. That's basically the guess what? That's not a national goal, that's my individual goal. That goal shows at every level, just like spiritual. But the point I'm trying to bring out here, these upper 2 tend to be what I call, tend to be constructive in nature. Whereas the bottom 4 here tend to be destructive in nature. The upper 2 can operate over a longer time horizon, the bottom 4 over a shorter time horizon. And that's the nature of this note. Yes. Here you go. Make a copy of this whole page. Think of it this way as an example. If you go in and you take a country, let's say a country, for example, spent many years building up its defenses and collapsed in a few weeks. Well, those citizens can be irate at their meeting and say, we spent all this, the whole thing caved under, so you've got a lot going for you as a conqueror if you behave. If you misbehave, you lose it all. Because see, the leaders will be seen as morally corrupt, incompetent, unable to deal with that, like France might be doing. But if you misbehave, see, where Hitler really lost the war was primarily through transportation. So he won many victories because he winning his victories, he's generating enemies faster than victories. So pretty soon he had all enemies. Because even when he went into Russia, remember, in many ways, the Russian people welcomed, then he came down very heavy-handed on he lost all that. Now let's kind of review and expand a little bit differently. I want to go into something here. And then we're going to leave our sentence. Read that chart. Talking about unifying vision. And people are going to have that unifying theme, unifying vision, unifying ideal. Get something like that, you've got really a lot going for it. Worth the investment. It takes time. Okay? And here's the point I'm leading. It gives you really a theme for what I call survival and conflict in many different directions. Basically, what we're talking about here, unifying vision. Grand idea or overarching theme. Individuals as well as societies can shape and adapt. It offers a way to expose adversaries' flaws. You do that, boy, you really got something. And that's where the Marxists were strong for so long. They had a so-called utopian ideal. In the meantime, they're making capitalists look like a bunch of jerks and then taking over the world. What was one of the most significant events out of World War I? The establishment of the first communist state. World War II permitted what? The expansion of communism. They gained both ways. They should love both World Wars. And if they're the focus of evil and the evil empire, how do we explain all this expansion? I mean, all people are evil, that's what we should appeal to? Think about it. And then, of course, ingredients needed to pursue that vision. These kind of things. There's your basic aim. Now, we've got a problem here. If you tend to be this way, you tend to lose this. If you have this, you don't tend to have that. The Russians and Hitler had this kind of stuff, but they weren't able to do this. We seem to be able to do this, but we can't. They have a hard time getting that. In other words, those are hard to put together, is what I'm trying to tell you. But if you can get an external statement, a compelling external statement like we had during World War II Hitler, then you can have both this and this. In other words, there's something really perceived as a menace to your society. I don't care what it's other society or something is floating over you. You really make that compelling. That's important. Whether it's phone. Now, what's happened to the Marxian philosophy? See, they had no track record. before there's any comment states, there were no track records, all these ideal statements. Now there's track records, have a lot of problems. And we can expose those problems. Instead of saying they're just evil and it's all right, but you want to say, hey, wait a minute. Start laying it out. Do it in a very powerful way. You got a lot of problems. We can leverage that once. It should. But do it in a way that it's all high ground. Always don't do it the way you're down the sewer. That's not so good because then you hurt yourself. Very important. Okay. I'm going to skip the application, got a lot of time here, and I'll go right to the wrap-up. Now let's start pacing some things together. Start going over there. In other words, you want to be the hoser or the hosee? Let's get down to the fundamentals here. And that's it. Sort of happens. Game, how do you play? Now, when you sever the moral bonds, in a sense, with the new things I'm looking at, when you penetrate a system, you do certain things, he causes himself to sever his own moral bonds. In other words, where he starts violating some of those ideas. Not only internal, but external to his allies. Okay? Now I want you to read this chart and I'll make some comments on it. Some implications surrounding these things. I'll make some comments. Know what I'm saying in a tactical sense. Remember, multidimensional interaction. They suggest a spontaneous, synthetic, creative, rather than a step-by-step, analytical, logical, and discrete. What I'm saying is increase unit complexity, not enhance it. You know how I define complexity? Some people get unhappy about that. I define it differently. That doesn't mean to be variety is not necessarily complexity. Variety without harmony, then it's complex. Variety without apparent harmony. I can have variety as long as I can see the harmony, and then it's not complex for me. But if I can't see the harmony, I got problems. Variety without harmony. So complexity, one man's complexity may be another guy's harmony. So it's a very personal kind of thing. In a strategic sense, we want to use that variety of low rapidity. So it makes it very difficult. The other guy can't bring the work up, who can't keep up. So basically what we're saying, up here, we're trying to we're trying to reduce our friction, our time, in order to cope with things. Down here, we're trying to pump up our adversary's friction and increase his time, so he can't cope. In other words, we want to get a mismatch of friction and time. So we get that leverage, make it difficult. And what I'm suggesting here, if you start setting up very complex arrangements, in other words, where you don't have that harmony with that variety, then you got a problem. In other words, can you internalize those relationships that you set up? If you can't internalize them, there are many out there, you've got a problem. You know, just like when you drive a car, there's a lot of complex things you do, but you don't have to think about it. You do it. It's complex unless you see the harmony. But once you put it together, it's not complex. So can you set your organization up so people just naturally do it? It operates in a very harmonious way without having to be explicitly detailed. In other words, those implicit connections or bonds with vectors. Okay, so with that in mind, we can look at it a little bit differently. An alternative sense. We go back and go over all the subpackages of it, cloud with the train time. What we're really saying here is variety and rapidity allow us to magnify our adversary friction, stretch out his time to respond to that. Likewise, we have harm and initiative in our system, we can diminish our own friction, compress our own time to exploit that variety and rapidity. So all together, get paced all together, all four of these together, it allows us to literally pull our adversary back inside himself. He can't stay on top. So this tends to be the destructive side here, and then you're more of your constructive side here. Remember, you always want to keep in mind, you plan a destructive effort also, because you just don't do destruction. You want to always build up the support toward yourself. How many people here read College? How many people did? Well, he laid out in his book one an interesting thing where he said, look, if you're looking at society, think of three components in society: the government, the armed forces, and the people. Not bad. Now, if you think about, in this sense, if you're going to put a coup d'etat on somebody, all you're doing is trying to replace one government with another. If you're talking about blitzkrieg, you're working against the armed forces and the government. If you're working about guerrilla warfare, you're primarily working on the people. You're trying to siphon away from the government and armed forces, so they got nothing to work with. Of course, that's politics also. You're trying to siphon the people away from your adversaries. So you get the votes, he doesn't. You get in power, he doesn't. Same game. So now, with that in mind, if you want to pretend you're a modern Sun Tzu, and you want to make these statements, the art of success in a very simplified way of looking at it. That's good politics. Now let's go to the epilogue and we'll finish up. This is the last part. Remember I told you, we were talking about, I sort of unsettled when I started thinking online about the so-called principles of war. These things are unfolding, maybe a little bit different. And, of course, that's the nature of this chart here, the fact that I was unsettled. And so what I want to do, because of this, let's look at some principles of war or military art. So I'll show them to you from four countries. USA, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, France. You don't have to read it in detail and leave the hard copy. The key thing is, though, USA and United Kingdom are quite close here. Soviet Union is a bit different, plus the Soviet Union's got so-called mobility and temporal speed. And the French only have three: contrary efforts, free market, forces. The point is they're all different. And Germany doesn't have any, but didn't. They have some now. So let's critique. First, it doesn't reveal how they interact or mechanisms are doing. But the second bullet is more meaningful. Because what I'm saying here, scientific law principles same for all countries and tend to change a little over time. On the other hand, we know there's different for different countries. And over time, we see them change. So if you have a so-called principle of war, think of it in this sense. Newton's second law of motion, F equals ma. You know, if you don't have F equals ma for one country, something for another country. F equals ma or it doesn't equal ma. Regardless whether you're Russian, Chinese, British, American, or what. Particularly when you see the different principles, some countries don't even have it. They're talking about the same phenomenon. How can they be principles of war? So this would suggest I'm saying they're not principles. Then there seems to be some kind of a laundry list or checklist that people are trying to keep in mind, whatever it is. I don't know. It's certainly not principles. They really don't see that. But maybe there's an alternative possibility. We've looked at a lot of stuff, so why not collect these bits and pieces and assemble them together and see what we have. And here's some things we looked at just to convince Liz. Remember, we want to compress our time and stretch out adversary's time. Invert it. We want to compress his and stretch ours out. Boy, certainly not to deal with. We want to generate these unequal distributions and basically gain that moral, mental, physical, whoever you are. Certainly once you get on it. We want to pump down our friction and pump up our adversary's friction. In other words, basically we're trying to generate all these mismatches in our favor as much as possible. In other words, the idea being to get inside his OODA or inside his mind time span. And if we can realize that gives a base for penetrating his organism and bring about his collapse. At the same time, we want to be able to do this, amplify our spirits. So now we paste all that together. My final chart. You're probably wondering when I'm going to get there. What I call a general central theme that we've been talking about here all day. Took longer than normal because I was digressing things that are introducing some other notions. That is it. Are there any questions?
Got a comment. You talked about how maneuver in moral conflict is better than the attrition conflict. But I think in today's day and age, like use Vietnam as an example, the American public or the press want immediate results. And that's why, is that not a reason why?
Let me go back, since I talked about that earlier. You're on something. I think you're on an important comment there. Remember when I said earlier, I don't know, a couple hours ago, I made the comment. I said, I'm answering you. I want to go back and get some other information. I made the comment that where Weinberger said, we're not going to get any more conflict unless we have the support of the American people. Remember that? But you're touching on this right now. And then I went back and said, yeah, but in Vietnam, when we started that war, we had the support of the American people. Again, which raised the question, what happened? Why did we lose it? Where's the thing you're touching on? So what happened? Why did that all drain away? Because we put out, I'll tell you what happened. You look back. We put out all these phony reports of all the progress we were making. The press got wise to that and started printing it back in this country. Plus the fact, remember, we had that 1-year rotation policy. People going over and back, and they're coming back. All those, their comments say it's not working. It's diffusing throughout our society. We couldn't stop it. Because the guys are coming back. They're even talking about it. So now we have a mismatch between what the government is saying and the events that they're playing out. Support went right to the floor. You've got 11. In World War II, nobody said that war was going to be over early. In fact, Churchill said blood, sweat, and tears. Couldn't even promise them victory. We really made the enemy look bigger than they were. We said, God damn, we're going to have to work this problem, otherwise we're not going to make it. We in Vietnam knew we had all the resources. We were on top. We didn't call up the reserves, didn't get everybody's support. Plus we started lying when our goddamn progress wasn't going good. El Tubo.
Why do you lie?
Do you think we have a little disinformation going on from the other side?
Yeah, you're always going to have that. Everybody says, the Russians are always pumping out disinformation. You think we go around the world and tell the truth to everybody? We didn't even tell the truth to our own people. We said we were succeeding when we weren't. That's disinformation. I know that's not pleasant to hear, but that goes on. You've got to face up to it. I'm trying to tell you, if you don't correct your mistakes.
Why did that happen originally when the people were still behind the bad information?
Remember, what about let me go back. one point before I hit you. Hang on to your question. Let's go back an example. I know it's hard to accept. Let's go back to DIVAC. The Army went out with a blessing of the Pentagon. They put this tape out. They even gave a copy to Denny Smith, which they showed these drones going over exploding in the air. Look at that thing's hitting accurately. They forgot to tell the guys they were command destructing those from the ground. That's disinformation. But then when he was told that happened, he came unglued. And he should have. Then the word got out, the whole press got it, they command destructed those drones. End of DIVAC. So don't say we don't pump out disinformation. We do. Now I'm not saying you shouldn't have deception in war. You may need it. But it goddamn well better work, and you better understand what you're doing before you get into it. It's going to be there. But when you're in a situation where it's going to drain out over time and you're putting this stuff out, that's eventually going to get out. And particularly so when we had these one-year tours, people are going there and coming back and saying, geez, this sucks. And they're talking, and of course they're talking to everybody and their friends, and the press is over there getting it, freezing the whole thing come unwound.
An example would be you put out information on polls that wasn't true. And there are 3 or 4 other polls come out that are just diametrically opposed to what your campaign has done.
Second,
Say that.
yeah, not too good. Particularly if they look into it and say, geez, this is a rigged poll. It's a phony device. Because they'll start, well, how did they poll? What were their techniques? Found out it was took a narrow sample or something, or what you call a selected group, in order to make it look good. In other words, rig the poll so you get the results you want. Just like you rig the test so you get the results you want. And you got to be very careful. I'm serious about it.
In the instance you were talking about on the guerrilla warfare, going after the moral.
Incidentally, that doesn't mean the other guy's done it all right either. I'm not saying that because in corporate you really, when you're thinking, you got to think about these things. Go ahead.
And you were referring to the statements by General Blight.
By who?
Ball.
Block. Excuse me, Ball.
Ball.
Okay. I didn't even get it wrong. He's the guy I talked to.
He said that as an effective commander, you need to inspire your men and then give them a mission and let them go do it. We got in trouble.
Now,
We got in trouble last time we did that back in 1972.
okay. Now, if you're going to do that, know what I said? I made something very
You did
important.
say be prepared to stand by them.
Well, but I said something else. And if you're going to do that kind of thing and let them do it, that suggests then, I didn't say suggesting it's very strong, you better have that common outlook so you understand the kind of things they're going to be doing and the constraints you're going to have upon them,
Yeah.
or to let them do it.
And they didn't
Without
get in
that
trouble
common
for
outlook.
breaking into the Democratic headquarters the wrong way. They got in trouble because they weren't supposed to be in there.
And you're violating cultural.
Yeah.
In this country, that sort of says, you really shouldn't do that.
Well, we got carried away with the game.
Well, yeah, but see, you're in the United States, and even whether you're one political party or another, or you're one aspect of society or another, there's certain cultural constraints upon you that are looked down upon. And if you violate that, of course, if you don't get caught, you might be all right. But if it gets caught, all of a sudden you're deep yogurt. They might have thought, well, hell, we're going to make it free, but they didn't, and they paid the price. Got to keep those things in mind. Back to you.
Well, originally, this was for the people behind the Vietnam War. So
Say
was
again?
it part of the strategy to put out this information? Was it some grand plan that they had, they thought they had to do that? Or what was the purpose behind the misinformation?
Well, if you're
They
gonna-
still had to report?
If you're going to get in war, relative to your adversary, and you want to pump out disinformation or misinformation, or allow him to draw his own incorrect conclusion when you're operating.
This is when I was,
But on the other hand, if you're going to be in operation, you say, boy, we really need the support of the American people. And we say, these guys, we don't even have to call it the, look what happened, they didn't call it the reserves. And they just said, we can operate this economy, full blow, plus we can fight that little, that wasn't even a war, just a two-bit thing over there. And a one-year tour. Well, if that's the case, how come we didn't end it? See, that's one important thing why the draft, I think, is important. I know it's unpopular. The draft and calling it the reserves, what you do when you do that kind of thing, see, the people say, hey, this is kind of serious. And then don't underplay what you can do. They say, we really got to pull this one together. Another thing, by having a guard, call it the guard and the reserves, well, that seems to work. In fact, I think a large portion of force should be guard and reserve, because, you know, the guard and reserve has very strong moral ties to their local communities. And if you've got the support of the people and bring them up, see, that tends to solidify that you keep it together. And if you do that, you know, then you have a greater option for playing deception campaigns, because now people won't say, "Oh, we got to be careful. We could lose this thing and make us look like a bunch of jerks." So you bob it up. Well, this is really no great thing. And Cadillac, and this, and a little war going on. See, World War II, there was no doubt. Everybody knew, hey, you know, we may not make it. So we better really lean into this. I remember it very vividly. You know, we had ration cards, couldn't get gas, couldn't get this. Of course, we had an opponent where that was easy to do. A guy by the name of Adolf Hitler. That helped a lot, you know. So if you make your opponent look like Hitler, you got a lot going for you. But it's got to be compelling. But see, the point is, we went in there with the support of the American people. Then we pumped out all these phony stories of how we were doing, and it wasn't paying off because we wanted to be able to show progress. So
And that's relating all this to what we did in campaign. So that was a bad decision on their part. They put out too much bad information at the wrong time or whatever, and they never backed away from that, right? What you're saying is
they may have put it out for initial conference, but if they really saw that was going bad, they better better replay that music and replay it in such a way that, you know, you can always structure stuff. So you say, look, granted, this thing's tougher than we have. And you might even be able to get more support. But you have to be very careful when you do that. I'm serious, you really do. But if you keep trying to hide it when they know it's otherwise, and you keep digging into your heels, it's just going to pull you down. It'll just pull you down.
On the other side of it, if you're polling thing, Carlisle, if you pump out and say that your poll was worse than it actually was, at that point now you're starting to get inside these people because they're looking at...
Say that loudly. You're saying something very important. I want to amplify that. You're saying something very important here.
If, for instance, you get a poll and you're, say, 45% or something, and you have a press conference and say that you're only at 35%, the other guys are looking at that poll and say, wait a second, what kind of poll is that guy looking at? That sets them to thinking what's going on, confusing them.
Let me give you another aspect. I'll let you in a minute. There's one of the things that we've done, some people I've operated against, and some people have a hard time doing, once they see they have success, they want to take every little bit of it. I said, wait a minute, you know, the data's not that accurate. We know that. I'm talking about like in engineering and airplane. I said, look, let's understate it, goddamn. We know, no matter how we look at it, this is okay. Yet, it feeds our case for the argument we're trying to poke. So let's understate the thing. Then what happens? When you do that, you make your case, the other side's going to check it out. When they find out you understated, Christ, it's demoralizing. Which is another aspect of the thing you're saying. So there's different ways that can be done. Go ahead.
Okay, let me change something. I want to change the discussion here entirely to a different subject. Because it's a problem that I've encountered in campaigns. We're talking about entropy, which is kind of the natural dissolution of everything.
That's the way it goes.
That's kind of what campaigns are. They're kind of organized chaos.
Yeah.
And it seems sometimes it's very hard even to get any rigidity in an organization. So to try to make it function and do certain things. At the same time, here we're trying to be as flexible as possible. And that seems almost contradictory. In the fact that, for instance, if you're trying to put together a literature drop, for instance, I mean, that takes a lot of organization and planning, and you've got a lot of people running around that have never done a literature drop before. And so there has to be some rigidity of function.
Okay, know what you said. A lot of people never done that before. What did I tell you about before about common outlook and that kind of stuff? I said, if you don't have a common outlook, you're going to have more detailed instruction, or people haven't done things before. Remember what I said about Balk? I said, remember he said, if you're division commander, you may have some people in there that you can give them a long leash and they can do it. Other people, you better watch carefully, they're going to get you in trouble. And that's exactly what you're talking about right now. Now, politically, since the campaigns operate over, you know, sort of a short period, of course, nowadays I don't know whether they're short anymore or not. and there's new people flooding in, you have that problem. But on the other hand, the military, who might have guys there for years, that transfer in and out after, they still adopt rigid attitudes. I think you people are more flexible. It seems to me, I've never been in a political system, just from your comments and your remarks. Of course, some people may not be too flexible. Of course, they're not flexible enough, they may not be around after a while either. Politically speaking. But I think, this is the thing, it's a common outlook. So if you have a real good shared outlook with certain people, you don't have to give them a lot of instruction. Certain people I work with, we work together so long in different enterprises, I just get on the phone a couple words and I just hang up and I know it's okay. And I just check back and you tell how it's coming. He'll say it's going good, it's good enough, press. You always want that feedback. But that doesn't mean you want to give a person detailed instruction. You always want to keep getting feedback. Just enough to be sure you know what's going on. And again, you have to understand there's a certain trust, there's a certain bond. And you have to face up to it. If it's not going right, and that's one of the hardest things I've had to teach people, if it's not going right, face up to it right now. Because we can look at it. You wait, it may be too late. You look at it and say, look, we can redo. It's not the fact that, it doesn't mean goof per se. There might be events you didn't assess correctly. Some of us may have missed it. Well, you say, okay, yeah, you begin to reconstruct. Well, you wait too long, you're in a bag. It's too late. And that's why those informal, I talked about those informal loops. One informal loop. So, because what you're doing by having those informal loops, you're not only getting your formal perspective, you're getting other perspectives, and then you can start meshing together, see if they tie together, so you get a better overall image of what's taking place. I used to encourage my people, well, beat the bushes around the Pentagon. I didn't care what it is. Beat the bushes, have a ball. So as long as we understand what we're about, let's not play some dirty games.